All right. Good evening, guys. Today is Sunday, February 22nd. So, it was kind of brought to my attention um after the fact that when I was recording for the 20th and the 21st, that you could see me moving, but you could not hear anything I was saying. And again, as I record, I actually do my reading that day and then I do a recording. So I don't go off of any notes. Gonna try to get better about that because this proved to be a great challenge for me. The book of Numbers is so rich, but it's almost like all of Numbers was covered and more than half of the book was covered in these last 3 days. And that's one of the things that I mentioned early, or when they actually do big jumps. So today's reading was supposed to be just Numbers 22, 5 through 38, but then tomorrow's reading jumps all the way to Deuteronomy chapter 29. So my challenge today on this Sunday, in addition to attending church and a Bible study and driving my daughter back to campus and coming home, I completed the book of Numbers, so I'm going to try to give a recap to the best of my ability. But the book of Numbers is so rich. The person who put this reading plan together, again, there's reasons why they don't do everything because I guess they want you to be able to complete it in a timely manner, the whole Bible. And I think one of the things that the book said was that some of the things are repeated like throughout the word. So that was how they choose it. And then you see in the book of Numbers, there is a lot of things when it goes into the different clans, but it's just so rich. So I'm going to pick up from chapter 14 because it's so important. This is after the people come back and give the people of Israel the discouraging report. It was like Caleb was like, don't worry, like we could take it. But it was like once the people heard the bad report that these people were so big and that, that they wouldn't be able to take it, again, they complained. But this time, God was more than angry. One of the things that I think I had brought out was they still um kept talking about going back to Egypt, and they were looking for like a new leader to actually lead them back to Egypt. And one of the things that Moses was telling them is that you're not coming against me and Aaron, you're actually coming against God. And God was like, how long will I have these people who have contempt for me? And at that moment, God was like, all of these people will not enter the promised land. He wanted to destroy them right then and there. But Moses pleaded on their behalf because that was who Moses was. Moses was the assigned leader of a great nation, and he got a chance to know God and how he thought, and he always went on up to God on behalf of the people. And basically, he was saying to God, what will these nations think because they know how great you are because of how you are with us? But that was when God said that these people over the age of 20 will not enter into the promised land. And it was one of those things that Moses went back and he told the people, like, you guys, like what God said, because that's who he was. He pleaded on behalf of the people to God, but he went back and told the people what God told him to tell them. And so they decided that they were, they changed their mind. It was like, oh, now, we'll go, we'll go. But it was too late because it's one thing that you kind of get in the book of Numbers is that, and it's even in one of the chapters where it's like, God is not a man, he does not lie. Like what God says is going to happen is definitely going to happen. So at this point, Moses and Aaron, they were still the leaders, and God just continued with them and God continued with Moses and Aaron, like they were going to be the ones now to lead the next generation into the promised land. And so God continued, and this was one of the things because as he was spending time with Moses, it was where God was showing like very specific things that he wanted them to do, ways in order to sacrifice and ways to worship him. and he was very specific in how people was to approach him. And of course, still dealing with the Israelites, there was still so much that had to actually happen during this time. And one of the things that God did immediately was the 10 men who came back with the bad report, he struck them dead with a plague. And it was one of those things where now it was like the people of Israel, they decided that they were going to go, even though God told them that they were not going into the promised land. They still decided to continue in that way. And it says that the people defiantly pushed ahead toward the hill country, and they went with neither Moses nor the ark of the Lord's covenant. And the Amalekites, it says, and the Canaanites who lived in those hills came down, attacked, and chased them back as far as Hormah. So it was one of those things where it's almost like they got so used to doing things and God forgiving them because Moses was crying out on their behalf, that when things had actually changed, they didn't accept it immediately because they didn't even know how to process it. But one of the things was that God continued, and he continued with his will and the way that he wanted things to be done. Again, I'm trying to go back and not miss anything. But it shows that people decided that they were gonna rebel against Moses. And so they had one of the Levites, and he was a leader, and him with the another 250 other leaders of the community, all prominent members of the assembly. They decided that they were going to again go against Moses. And it was a lot because mm, it was one of those things that where God was very specific with what was going to happen to these people. And again, Moses went and he cried out, but then God gave Moses a warning and he warned that anybody, for people to get away from these people. And people did not get away from him. And what he did in the beginning, because it says these men have shown contempt for the Lord. And if the people who did not get away from them at the time, God actually opened up the ground and took them in, and then closed the ground back, and you could hear the people screaming. And then again, the people came against Moses and Aaron, like, what did you do? And then it showed because at that time, they had the people come to the tabernacle, the 250 leaders, because these were the Levites, and they were told to bring their incense burners. And after that, when the people was like to Moses and Aaron, what did you do? God wiped all of them out with fire. And it was like they were then told to collect those incense burners that the men had in their hands to create an overlay, because it was one of those things that this was something that happened that God wanted the people to be reminded of. And it's just one of those things where I think when I was reading this, I had to like stop and pray because I have the pleasure in this season to be under a pastor in North Carolina, and I still have very close ties with my church in New York. And this really grieved my heart because it's one of those things when people get called at that level, it's like the responsibility is so great. And I think we just really can't understand what they actually go through. But I think the part that really grieved me was when you know when the people again started complaining, and now this is already after God had did away with the people who complained and went against, and they're starting to see judgment now. And so this was when Moses strikes the rock. Now we're in chapter 20. And it was one of those things where they again, like they started referring to Egypt like it was like the promised land. Like, why did you bring us from this place? And they even started saying that this land had no grains, no figs, no grapes, no pomegranates. It's like, are you kidding me? Like these were the very things that the people had brought back to you specifically from the promised land to show you what was there, but you didn't want to go forth because you was, believe the bad report and not what God had said. And so this is when Moses and Aaron, they now lost their opportunity to go into the promised land. And it was one of those things that it's almost like God had the promise was still with them, but not with that generation. But in being a representative and having to go back and to give the report and actually still defending the people, it's like now they lose their place in the promised land. And it was one of those things that kind of struck me how it's like at some point your relationship with God has to become so defined. And forgive me because, again, I didn't write anything down as I was going through it. But I know one of the things that stood out the most was that the company you keep matters to God. And it's almost like if you have to be surrounded by people that's not believing God for what He's doing, it just requires a really special place. I don't even know how to put it now, but I know it just changed everything with them always pleading for the people, but then having to go back and being frustrated by those same people. And I think that was it. It's almost like God, when you have a special relationship with God and He calls you into leadership, it's one of those things where your relationship has to become so connected that you can't allow the people that you're leading to affect you in that manner and there not be consequences. And I think one of the things that and going through these chapters, to me it just makes it seem how now that we're in a New Testament after Jesus, it's like we have this person in between us, which is Jesus, and the power of the Holy Spirit. So it's almost like where God was coming direct to the people, it's like now we have this, and it's like if you don't go through this book and see the way that people had to atone for sins intentionally, unintentionally. It's just so many things going on that you'll appreciate more when you see Jesus as the sacrifice for the things that we do intentionally, unintentionally. And it'll just mean so much more when you actually take the time to go through this. And I think because Numbers was so good, a lot of it I actually had to listen to because it was so many chapters that had to be covered in a day. But it was one of those things that I didn't want to skip and I didn't want to leave anything out. And the crazy thing is, even after God told Moses and Aaron that they were not going to enter either, they still had to lead the people. And I'm like, that is so like I just can't even comprehend it, honestly. It's almost like, I've been leading the people and now I'm not even going to make it into the promised land, but I still have a job to do. And so it was like now they still had to actually get up and keep moving, but now instead of moving toward the promised land, they had to go other places because now this generation was going to die out before that next generation was going to be able to go in. So now you have Moses and Aaron, and it shows how they had to now ask permission to try to, move through the land, and they got turned around. And I think that this was where mm, after he struck the rock, it's almost like God began to remove things from one generation to the next. Because in that same chapter, chapter 20, we see Aaron pass away. So now Aaron, and the way he passed away, he had to take off his stuff and it had to be handed over to his son because his son is now, and this was all done where everybody could see. And then Aaron passed, and it's like now Moses, who always had Aaron by his side as he led those people, now he doesn't have Aaron, but he's still the lead and he's still moving forward. And so it was one of those things where as they continued to move forward, even though that whole generation was not going to be able to go into the promised land, but the next generation was. God was still with them. And they were still a people that, God was not going to allow people to mess with. And one of the things that I kind of like, but this was something that I got to point out too. And this was when they began to, this was after Aaron had passed away. And, God had gave them victory. Um, over the Canaanites, the people that refused to let them pass through, right? And it was like they actually came up against the people, but God gave them victory. But it says that shortly after that, again, they began to grow impatient. And now they started to speak against God and Moses. And they said, "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die here in the wilderness?" And they complained. And it said, "We hate this horrible manna." It's almost like manna was something that was described as being all sufficient to be able to get them through the day. But now they actually said that they hated it. And this is when God sent a plague and a lot snakes. I'm sorry. This is when he sent the snakes. And a lot of people were bitten and they died. And it was like they begged for God to remove it. But instead of God removing the snakes, it's like he had a golden had Moses place a golden snake on the top of his spear. And so people had to actually look at that golden snake to be healed. So it was one of those things where they got so used to coming against God. And like, even with all of the stuff that's going on, it's almost like they just became used to doing something, God removing it, and then they're moving forward. But God is now starting to make them, more accountable. Like, you caused them snakes to come upon yourself. So instead of removing it, I'm going to give you something now that you can put your eyes on, but I'm still going to allow you to be healed. But now you have to do more than just ask and have Moses represent you. And so it was one of those things. Now, they continue and they continue going. And that's pretty much what the book of Numbers is. But it was another passage. And it was where, like, because now they're moving as a nation and other nations are now starting to take notice. So as they came up on another nation, I'm going to say this is around chapter 24. And they actually went because they knew of a man and they called a man. His name was Balaam. Balak, sorry. It was Balaam, right? And they called for him and they wanted, because they knew him, and they wanted him to curse the people of Israel. But what they failed to realize was that Balaam's God was the same as Israel's God. And Balaam came and he was like, "There's nothing I can do to curse these people. Like, these people are blessed." And they didn't want to receive that. But it was just one of the things that stood out so interesting to me is that when God placed a blessing on those people, that blessing didn't leave. Like, nobody else could put a hand on them. They could only cause things to happen amongst themselves that they would have to pay for. But nobody else outside of that kingdom could do anything against them because they still were covered and blessed in so many ways by God. And it's like now it's almost like you see them, the rest of Numbers is them going the different ways, but God actually now starting to tell Moses how the land would be divided, how everybody would do things, and Moses was still leading. And when God had said to Moses, again, that he would not enter into the promised land, but God allowed him to come up and see it. And God was like, well, Moses said on behalf of the people, like, if I'm not going to do it, at least have somebody else come because these people still need a leader. So it was one of those things where, like, the way the book of Numbers is, it is a great book. Again, I don't know why the reading plan it jumps so much, but I promise you it's gonna be, it's some of it is the tribes and giving names because they took their first census in this thing and then they had to take another one because they had to now look, for the people who will be warriors and who will fight as they continue to move around the wilderness. And so it's a lot of things going on and things being set up, but God is still doing a lot of things through Moses because Moses is still leading them. And I just think that this book is so amazing, and actually spending this time to actually go through the whole book was it allowed me to have conversations, to pray for people in ways that if I hadn't stopped to actually read these chapters or even listen to them, I don't think I would have appreciated as much as the people who sacrificed to lead and be over us today. And so I pray that you guys are taking the time to go through this. Again, this one is longer, and I do apologize. I'm gonna have to figure out how to be better moving forward. I know tomorrow I have a lot of chapters to read as well with Deuteronomy, but I do appreciate having this time to go through the Bible and actually share these messages. So I pray that everybody is blessed and, you're getting the time to put in that intentional time with God. Love you guys and enjoy your evening.